Hello to everybody coming in. We're just going to let people in from the waiting room. So come on in, we'll get started in just a few minutes. Or I should say a minute. Okay, it's just 12 o'clock now, so we'll keep letting people in, but I'll go ahead and get started. Just wanted to say good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are, and thank you so much for joining TASP's free webinar series. I'm Chelsea Time, the Executive Director of TASP, and I will be your moderator for the day. This year, I just want to give a big shout out to Maryland Developmental Disabilities Council. Because of funding we received from them for this year, we're able to offer this webinar series free again this year. This is our second of 2022, and we'll be offering 2 more after this one, so keep your eye out for those. Today, we are welcoming Tom Robinson and Lindsay Brillhart, who are going to talk to us about building formal and informal support teams to assist parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So for those of you who don't know much or anything about TASP, I know a number of you have been with us on other webinars or in our trainings. TASP stands for the Association for Successful Parenting, and we are a nonprofit committed to enhancing the lives of parents living with cognitive difficulties and their families through education, advocacy, and support. So we will add everybody who comes today to our mailing list. If you're not already on there, just to make sure you get updates from us about when registration is open for the next webinar, any upcoming trainings we have, or just information that we share that we think is pertinent to the work. You can also, if you're not already following us, haven't liked us on Facebook, please do that as well. We share a bunch of content there. I just shared today about our latest blog post. So if you haven't, check out our blog. We have a blog post today in our parenting tips series from another parent board member who some of you may know, Ivanova Smith. Just some general reminders for the webinar today. We do this in a meeting format instead of webinar because we do like them to be as interactive as possible, but that means you can have your cameras on or off, whatever you're comfortable with. And also just keep yourself muted if you're not talking. We do record the webinar, so if you don't want to be on camera and don't want to be seen or heard, just keep your camera off and keep yourself muted. We don't provide CEs or slides, but hopefully you guys all got an email with a companion PDF, a document that just kind of follows along with what Tom and Lindsay are going to be talking about. If you didn't, I'll send it again in a follow-up email after, so you have it to refer back to. Both Tom and Lindsay are asking that you put links in the chat as we go, and we'll make sure that we leave time at the end for questions, or just hold on to your questions and we'll let you know at the end when we're going to be answering them. Sorry, that's confusing. I have both hold questions till the end and questions are welcome, but please hold them until the end. And if you have any technical issues, try Zoom support. Betsy is on and helping me moderate them, but we're not going to be super helpful in the middle to help with any technical assistance, but Zoom is much more helpful than us with that. Again, just want to shout out to Maryland IDD Council for their funding for this year and keeping these webinars free to the public. And I'm going to give you a brief intro of Tom and Lindsay, who are going to talk about building formal and informal support teams to assist parents with IDD. So Tom Robinson is the director of Thomas Robinson Consulting, which provides individualized services in home communities through a family-centered team approach that promotes inclusion for individuals with developmental delays or disabilities in Northwest British Columbia, Canada. Lindsay is the mom of 2 girls, and she'll talk to you about them and share her family journey a little bit later. She's a strong self-advocate for her kids and others, formerly worked with the ARC of Hamilton County and Hamilton County Developmental Disability Services in Ohio. She currently resides in Cincinnati with her partner, Phil, and her 2 kids, Juliana and Sarah. So she'll share a little bit more later, and I'm going to stop screen sharing at this time and pass it over to Tom.
Thanks, Chelsea. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start by identifying the reality that we all live with, and that is that human beings are social. We seek relationships. It is something that drives us, motivates us, and can enhance the quality of our lives when those relationships are developed, when they're positive, when they're sustained, and when they enable us to feel good about ourselves. This is especially true for parents who have intellectual developmental disabilities, or IDD, and it becomes even more challenging for some of them to build a personal support system that allows them to make positive choices, feel good about their own identity, and be set up for success in life. So thinking about relationships is key to what we're going to be talking about today. All people, and that's important to underscore that, all of us benefit from personal support systems. Sometimes we take that for granted. For adults who are parents, it can become critically important in how they function. What is essential is that we start early. I know of parents who have a child who has been assessed as having an intellectual or developmental disability. At age 4 for that child, they're not thinking about getting them ready for their own parenthood, having their own children. It's a pretty scary thought for most families. But we have to be thinking about how relationships are built early, how those opportunities are created to enable a person to connect with others, and from that, maybe develop friendships. It starts early. I know a lot of the work we do in British Columbia is about early intervention. And part of that early intervention is creating social opportunities and frequent contact for children to learn how to connect with others. That can be especially difficult when a child has learning or communication challenges. Where it can be illustrated is by a teenager I worked with named Zach. And Zach, really, in high school, he was, at the time of this little tale, he was 16. And he wanted desperately to have a girlfriend. He desperately wanted to be part of the male groups that you would see in the high school corridors. And he was limited in how he could make contact. It was one thing that he was passionate about, and he could talk, and he really did talk for 2 to 3 hours about Japanese medieval armor. Now, if he approached the girl and said, "How do you feel about the samurai and their culture?" He wouldn't wait for an answer of yes or no. He just would keep going and going, and barely notice that 5 minutes later the girl had disappeared down the hallway. So for him, his ability to communicate something he was interested in was really limited. One of the things that becomes important in work with parents is to say, yeah, you want to protect your child, but you also want to create linkages in terms of recreation and leisure, so they'll have something in common with their peers as they age, as they grow up. That becomes really important. It's something they can talk about. Maybe they take swimming lessons together. Maybe they do crafts together. Play dates become important. And there is that concept, which has been there for a long time, about the dignity of risk. It can be risky for parents with their child to say, yeah, I don't know if I want my child going into the community. I understand inclusion is a good thing, but there's risk, and there is. However, the more isolated that child becomes, the less opportunity they'll have to develop connections with others. Another example of a real person, Bobby. Bobby lived in a community in a fairly rural part of Canada. He attended a independent school, and in that independent school, it was fairly close-knit group, and those children who attended the school, their families tend to know each other, and there was a lot of familiarity. Bobby went to school with those kids. By the time he was in high school and into high school, we're talking about his senior year now, getting to grade 12, he and those kids had been together since preschool. What happened as a result of that is they became friends. They included him. He was always with them. He was there. So through his high school years, he participated in parties, and no one thought not to invite him. He was asked, "Hey, Bob, you want to go hang out at the mall tonight?" It was a small mall, but I like to hang out there. And he would feel that inclusion, that involvement, that engagement. He talked about the other boys, about girls. He talked about sports. They talk about music. He was totally included. He was actually a poster boy for inclusion. So within that group, his parents came to a point where they had to make a decision. The school staff, and again, he did not have formal supports in any big way at all. He had school. And he was a teenager who never got into trouble. Nothing major ever. He was considered as easy to work with, likable kid, and he was very happy. I don't know what else to say. And his family was happy, and the school staff were happy, and they all were missing something. When it came time to graduate, he was going to graduate, but it was decided, because of his developmental disability, his intellectual disability, it might be beneficial to him to take another year of school. He could do that in that community. And work more on some life skills, work more on work experience, and just tune up. Sounded good. His parents said, "Yeah, that sounds fine. He could benefit from that. We're behind it." School said, "Yeah, this is great. It'd be great to have him back." There was one problem. All his friends graduated, and he was left behind. His support system, which was strong, evaporated because it was all tied to his peers, and his peers had their own lives. Most of them left the community. Most of them went on to college. Some of them went on to jobs outside this small community. They went to larger communities. And he had a whole new peer group that he was not familiar with. And he wanted to be included. He wanted to be considered part of that. And the school staff, encouraged. I think they actually had something called Friendship Hour, where he was matched up with another child of his age, and they were supposed to be friends for an hour. It didn't work, because this was contrived, and it was mechanical, and it was forced, and it wasn't what he's used to. And for the first time in his life, he became a behavior problem. He began to be a little more forceful, a little more aggressive at times. And now the formal support started to rearrange, and there was a referral to a behavior consultant, and there was a referral to a mental health worker. And looking at Bobby, it's like now there was a problem, and the school staff saw him as a problem kid. And everything had collapsed. He was also showing, now he was starting to show periods of depression, and just he was not doing well at all. Eventually, his family decided maybe the best thing was to move to another community, which they did. How did this happen? So what happened is he became part of a closed informal support system that worked. but it was closed. It was almost a community within a community. And when that community kind of evolved into something else, people moved away, and they do. He was left alone. And so what should have been something that worked had a time limit. And where I'm going with this, I know we're talking about parents who have IDD. Let's look at our children first. Let's look at children who have IDD and how we develop supports for them and how we can look at sustaining those supports, because there are lessons that we can learn from, and there are successes. But sometimes children like Bobby go through a kind of terrible time because the planning was too limited and everything had been taken for granted. And as a parent myself, I easy to fall into that. You think everything is going okay, and then you go, oh, how did I miss that? So it's something as service providers, as family members, as people in the community, we need to be a little more aware of the bigger picture. Are parents who have intellectual and developmental disabilities more at risk than other people? In some respects, they can be. We know through the literature that there's a higher proportion of people who have IDD who are diagnosed with a mental health disorder. There could be different reasons for that. I know in the work we've done, we do tend to see a higher number of adults who have anxiety difficulties, and that can be related to communication. Will it be language processing, or they're in a largely verbal world where literacy is valued, that they may not be able to kind of match some of those levels, and they get left out again and get frustrated, and there's greater anxiety, the stress of change. So in looking at some of the challenges that can be faced by parents who have IDD, you've got a little list on your handout, and it just, I'm going to just tell a quick story about a lady a parent who had all of that, every one of them. So let me introduce you to Rhonda. Rhonda, at the time I met her, she was 22. She was a single parent. She had a 5-year-old daughter. She lived in a largely indigenous community in a very remote part of our province, and she was poor. She was living under the poverty level, and she was unemployed. Her daughter was 5 at the time. I don't know if I mentioned that. And she was in a community that was a good hour and a half away from a larger center where there'd be more medical support. There was a drop-in nurse in her community who was very busy when she would come a couple of times a month. And so Rhonda was pretty much left to her own. She was living in she had a home that she rented. It was in really poor repair. She couldn't keep up the repair. It was very difficult for her. So we had transportation barriers to get her access to better medical supports. She had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. Not at the time, this came later, because of a childhood where she suffered almost unimaginable abuse. And she had survived that. And when she was a teenager, became pregnant and moved to this community, which was 4 hours away from her home community, which was even more isolated. And she valued 2 things in life. Well, actually 3. First was her daughter. But that was part of the one major value she had, and that was family. family meant everything to her, no matter what injustices had occurred, what horrible events she had witnessed or experienced. She valued family above all else. And the second thing she valued was her indigenous culture. That meant a lot to her and motivated her greatly. So she would, with her daughter, head down a very dangerous highway in northern British Columbia and hitchhiking that 4 hours to get to her home community so she could visit with her daughter her parents and other extended family members. So to say there were transportation issues is an understatement. What about childcare? It didn't exist. There's no respite, there's no childcare. It was the community, and she did the best she could with what she had to work with. Food security, there was very little there. Some people would help out in the community, but not too many. She was very isolated within an isolated community. So food security would be difficult. Sometimes food would spoil. She had trouble keeping it going, didn't pay the electric bill, sometimes wasn't paid. And there'd be spoilage and not good. Neighborhood crime, she had been sexually assaulted at one point. Literacy, she could read, but without great comprehension. And this was misunderstood. It was because she could read and speak reasonably well, and she could even speak her native language a little. She was overestimated how much stress she could handle, how much she was really understanding, and her ability to problem solve was overestimated by the minimal supports that had any contact with her. And she, as I mentioned, was a teenage single parent. And that in itself doesn't mean it's going to be a risk, but it does have an impact in terms of looking at the social determinants of health. That's one of the factors, as are a number of these other ones. So I want to talk about the duck being stabbed. Eventually, someone in the community thought there was too much of a problem and contacted Child Protective Services, and they got involved. They got involved in a big way. As a result, she relocated to another community, had another child, because when they got involved, she was pregnant, and then determined that without any opportunity to parent, she's already parented a 5-year-old, had that child apprehended at birth. So she wanted to live in the community where the 2 children were being raised by foster parents. And something happened that I have found to be really unusual. Child Protection Services said, yeah, we have jurisdiction. This is our mandate as a formal support to look out for the children. And we are going to guide the whole, what they would call the case. But they did it in an interesting way. I just don't see this happening enough. And I hope I'm incorrect about that. But the other services, so the direct service for, because Rhonda had an intellectual disability as well as mental health issues. So they decided that they were going to work as a team. And that meant bringing in services that work directly with people who have developmental disabilities. They decided to educate each other so that the different services would share what they could do and how they would do it. And it was one of the most incredible things I've seen, because everybody was spelling off each other and saying, we're working together for this family. And we're going to give the mom every opportunity, give Rhonda every opportunity to parent as best she could. She'd already been parenting on her own, but it was unsafe, and that was recognized. And the only thing that was really difficult for her was she wanted her kids back, wanted them back. And all these services got involved. And at one point, there had to have been about 12 services. That's overwhelming. That's just too much. It was too much for her. But over time, and again, there was this sharing of information. At one point, her physician was attending these meetings. In my experience, that's pretty unusual to get a doctor out. But he would come and he said, I'm going to educate all of you. I'm going to tell you what you need to do from a medical point of view and how you can help this woman's, because his mandate was his patient. That was Rhonda. Child protection, their mandate were the children. Community services, the different aspects of the direct services who had experience in working with people with learning difficulties, their mandate was Rhonda. And it was this sharing of information and trying to provide coordinated support, which to me was one of the more extraordinary things I've ever seen. I wish it had been repeated multiple times, but it hasn't been, at least in our area. And part of it was they took the time to explain to each other, this is what my job is. This is how I do my job. This is what I need to do. These are the rules that govern that. They'd explain that to Rhonda as well. And over time, and this is fairly common, the formal supports began to move away. Yeah, they began to change. Personnel would change. Some people would join the team who were less experienced. Didn't see the same priorities. But when there was this crisis that went on for a couple of years, it was a very solid team. And then the professionals started to drift away. Then something really interesting happened. The informal support started to take over. Rhonda attended a church in her community, and there were church members there who took an interest in her. She was interested in quilting. She was interested in doing beadwork, and she found people who were also interested, and they would do that. And then it became, well, let's get together next week, and we'll work on the quilting, but we'll also, why don't we just go for a coffee sometime? So it became truly informal. It became very caring. And in the community, some people who, the person in the pharmacy would say to her, hey, how are you doing? How's your daughter? They weren't looking at her as a person with disability. They were looking at her as a mom, as a person in the community who had value. And that informal support over time, there were bumps, there were ups and downs, but it held. And at this point in time, which are many years, Rhonda's a grandmother, and she spends time with her grandchild. So risk factors can vary. Sometimes we give them too much, the problem gets too much attention. I mean, a person gets identified by, oh, they're mentally ill. It's a horrible way of putting it. Or they don't have enough money. They're living in poverty, or their housing's really poor, and they live too far away. And we get caught up in the problems rather than how do we develop a personal support system that just works with and ideally the parent guides that personal support system. It doesn't take over. There may be a phase during the crisis period where they need someone else guiding it, but the goal should be that they take over that team. And if that team becomes more of a wraparound, I know Lindsay's going to speak more to that, they're in charge. They're the ones who are identifying who attends. Those meetings I spoke of for Rhonda, she would have, not at first, but later, she would have family members attend. She'd bring them. I want you here. I want my mom here. Mom probably hitchhiked to get there, but Still, she was guiding who was on that team, who she trusted and who she wanted there. And that became really important. So what are the differences between formal and informal supports? Formal supports may be mandated. Child protection services are mandated. They're there to protect children. That's their primary function, and they're guided by legislation, and there are very strict rules around their involvement. But there are other services, other formal services that involve professionals, and formal supports tend to involve people who are paid to be there. They're professionals. And many of those services may be voluntary. And sometimes a parent can get really confused by the mandated services, and someone else can come in and they're there for a service that involves community living, and they think they're all the same. So why should I trust you? I mean, you're all about taking away my child. And it takes time to build that trust. And it should, because in the beginning, when services come to a family, they're strangers. Now you have a mandated service, they knock on the door and you have to open the door. But if it's a voluntary service, not necessarily. The parent may think they have to, but over time, if they can't develop a positive relationship with that service provider, they may say, I don't want you in my life. And that's okay. Especially if it's an informed choice that they're saying, okay, I know what you offer and this isn't working. Sometimes professionals make some mistakes, and it's intrusive to go into someone's home. It is. I mean, I know myself, our family, there was a time when there was a family member who was really ill, and we needed support. We needed people to come to our home and provide nursing care. And they were great. We really valued what they could do, but it was hard because you kind of look around and go, I hope my house is clean, you know, I didn't do the dishes today. We had children. Our children were our priority as well. And so you've got these service providers coming in, and you try to make it work as best you can. They try to make it work as best you can, but they can make mistakes. One of the mistakes, it was one individual who was providing a service for the parent, but more, again, on a community living basis. He was there for life skills. And it was an Indigenous family. And one of the customs, and this is considered a way of showing respect, is when you go into a home, you take off your shoes. And this one individual said this professional said very clearly to the parent, your floors are too dirty. I'm not taking off my shoes. Now, they may have thought that wasn't a big deal, but it was very disrespectful. And you can't build a relationship without respect. Another professional said once to a group of us, and said, when a family offers me tea, cookies, tea, maybe coffee, but in this case it was tea, and I'm always going to say no. I don't want to put them out. I don't want tea. I always say no. Someone else said, but they're showing you, and this again is cultural. They're showing you hospitality. They're welcoming you. They're inviting you to join them. And some of these families, that does take energy. Yes, it does, and takes effort, but it's their way of trying to show you respect. So we have to kind of know the community, know that if you can, if it's a culture that's different from yours, try to guidance on what is considered the norm. And don't, as one social worker did as she walked in the door, said, "Where's your vacuum?" and started vacuuming the floor, which insulted the family. So we have to build relationships out of respect and out of trust. And again, most professionals are incredibly respectful, but remember, you begin as a stranger and you have to earn trust. It isn't just given. It shouldn't be just given. Other differences with formal supports is what a family can value, what parents can value, is the fact that you many times have people who are experienced, that they're skilled, they know about communication and learning style needs, and they will try to honor that. There may be some strategies they can offer you that will help you in how you address challenges. And so there is that. Informal supports may not have that understanding in the same way. Professionals will state fairly clearly that confidentiality is something that they value. And if that is, and it should be stated, when it is, it needs to be honored. I have worked with parents who said, so-and-so's the social worker came, or the service provider, and they said that confidentiality, and then my neighbor said she overheard them talking about us. So that's a real deal breaker. Is when you have to really, really watch. When you're looking at informal support, they may not see it the same way. They may not have the experiences, the skills in terms of addressing some of the parents' learning needs. Fair enough. You're not expecting it necessarily, but that can be learned. I know in small communities, this can be true anywhere. Gossip is something that people tend to do. So sometimes an informal support person may be visiting for tea or coffee, and they may go away with some really interesting gossip about the family. And in our small communities, that just goes through like a wildfire. And again, that can be a deal breaker. That can really be hurtful to parents when they find that they've shared something with someone. But the professionals usually, almost always, will say confidentiality matters. Informal supports, the rules are a little looser sometimes, but that gets learned. In terms of informal supports, what are we looking at? Professionals tend to be goal-based. This is what we're going to do. We're agreeing to work on this, whether it be life skills or parenting skills. This is what we're looking at. This is the target. And as a parent, we want you to understand that, agree, and then we're looking at helping you get there. So in doing that, the parent understands. Okay, fine. Goal-based, got it. Informal supports, there isn't the same structure. It's more about being with you, spending time with you, having a shared interest, and then kind of working from there. And without saying, oh yeah, this is what the goal is. We've got 3 months together and you're going to be my friend at the end of it. No. Relationships, about building relationships. And informal supports may lead to a friendship, but they may not. And that's the nature of relationships. They can become different things. Let me tell you quickly about Henry. Henry was a single parent. He was involved in co-parenting. So his son was being cared for by others. He was able to participate, sometimes with supervision, on caring for his own son. He was hurt by the fact that he couldn't take care of his child without others being there. That was devastating for him at times. So he wanted to find ways to feel good about himself in his community. So he had a job. He had a job for many years, and he was at a recycling depot. And from that job, he didn't get paid as much as the others who worked there. He was never invited out to have a drink or a coffee with the coworkers. They thought he was a really nice guy, but he had no connections with them. So he was an interesting man because he decided he wasn't just going to wait for things to happen. His father had taught him how to throw darts. He'd learned from his dad that, and this was a leisure activity that he really enjoyed. And so in his community, it's always important to know the community, because what's available, what's out there. If you like something, maybe it's there, maybe it's not, but try to match up with the community. So he discovered there was a darts league. And every Tuesday, he joined it. Every Tuesday he would go and he'd throw darts. It could get really competitive, and he didn't enjoy that part as much. So they had suggested to him, the other people, men and women, in the darts league, they said, why don't you be a spare? It gets a little intense when you're on a team because they want to win all the time. But if you're a spare, you can fill in, and it's a little more relaxed. And that worked. That worked for him. And these people, I think one or two of them actually became friends over time. He also tried to supplement he had a job, recycling depot, but he also wanted to supplement his income. So one of the things he liked to do, as long as he was able, was to shovel snow. As time went by, he had jobs with different, usually seniors, and there was one senior who he said, she really can't pay me. Oh, well, it's too bad you have other people. He said, no, you don't understand. Like, she can't pay me, but I want to help her. Oh, okay. I'm going to go and shovel her snow. When it snows, I'm going to be there. I'm going to do that. And she would deeply appreciate it when he did that. And sometimes would invite him over for tea and homemade biscuits, and became his friend because he did something to involve someone in his community who he saw as having a need, and he could do something about it. He also would bake muffins, periodically bake muffins, and especially carrot muffins, if I recall. And he'd bring those in a little bag, and he'd bring them, and he would give them to some of the professionals who worked with him. And he'd say, want a muffin. So he was giving them something. He didn't have a lot of professional supports, but it was the informal one that kind of guided. He navigated through it. There was one other I want to mention, that there was a gentleman in the community who he had known as a neighbor, and the neighbor got to the point where his health broke down, and he went into a long-term care home. And Henry decided that every Sunday he was going to go visit this man, bring muffins, and visit him. So he became one of the visitors on a long-term care home. Sometimes we forget that adults who receive services, formal services, are quite capable and feel really good about themselves when they're able to give to others too. And that's something, again, I think that can be nurtured earlier in life, that we can not overlook that and support it when it happens. And again, it can be based on mutual interest. So that's something I don't think we should be overlooking when we're working with individuals. On informal supports, each one can be unique. They evolve over time. They don't always stay, they do not stay the same. They can be reciprocal, each helping each other. And again, not goal-based. On that note, I am now going to turn over to Lindsay. And Lindsay's going to talk about her personal journey, and then you're on, Lindsay.
Thanks, Tom. I'm going to share a screen for Lindsay. And I just told her I forgot in the beginning to say as well that Lindsay's a little bit under the weather, and she's kindly agreed to still be with us today, but she just asked me to pass that along. Her voice is bothering her a little bit, so she's going to talk as best she can. And then at the end, when we're taking questions or when she's able, if she's feeling up to it, she'll answer her questions verbally. And if not, she might put them in the chat and Betsy or I can read them. Lindsay, can you see the screen with your pictures up there?
So this is my girls. The one in the blue, the one in the two on the ends are Julie, and the ones in the middle are Sarah, and the one in the gray is the most recent of Sarah. So I'm so happy. Got a recent one of her. Go ahead. All right. And like Chelsea said, I am under the weather, but I'm getting better. Yay. And I have Sarah that is 11 and Julie that is 20. So I just want to wrap back with Tom's stuff. Rhonda has a lot of the wraparound concept that we work with my family, and I'll explain it in a minute. But we want to honor boundaries and mandates and build the trust for the people first that we get together in our circles, because you never know if they're going to be a right match for your family. So we try to make sure that they're right for our family. And we've gotten to interview people. We ask them if they have kids and things like that, as they work with my family and things like that. And to know the community, we moved to our house 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, and we didn't know anybody. And I went on Facebook. I love Facebook. And I went on Facebook, and there was one person that knew where I lived, like the community that I lived. So I got to know the person with the community, and it's been amazing. So that if I have any questions about this area, I know I can go back to that person and develop relationships in the home community. That I developed a relationship with that person. I didn't know her at the beginning, but her and I talk almost every single day. She lives about 4 minutes down the road. So the wraparound concept with us is different than Tom's, because Rhonda was older and we do it with Sarah. Sarah's a nonverbal little girl, and we do it with her school. So we have mostly all professionals. There are a few people like my mom and our neighbor, not that neighbor that we got to know here, a former person that we used to work with. That so what we do is, like, once a month we get together, and actually what happened at the beginning, there's a person that asked us 15,000 questions. Yeah, there's professionals that like to do that. Nothing against you guys, but I like to get to know people before I want to ask them the questions and things like that. And I made sure I got to know the person. I asked him questions, he asked me questions. It was just like about your family and things like that, because I wanted to know when that person came into my my area, who he was. I didn't know who he was. He said, "Hi, I'm Chris." I didn't know who Chris was. I know Chris is a person that is really good in my community now, in a family, not a family member, but in my community now. So like anytime I can talk to him, that he knows what I'm going through. Or there's a lady named Linda, awesome lady that has helped us with other things. And how we got wraparound is actually this year with school, with COVID and everything else. My daughter needs an aide. My daughter needs a one-on-one aide. And at the end of last year, she went to this new school. And at the beginning of the year, she didn't have an aide. And we were like, okay, what do we do? So we had to go up high into the Ohio, and I'm from Cincinnati, but we had to go up high into everything to just make sure that we were doing the right stuff. As of about November, we found an aide, and the aide wants to work with her. And in Ohio, we have year-round schooling for the special ed kids. Like if they're not up to speed, they have a special ed program that is like for July. So Sarah will be in there from like 8 to noon on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So that means that I can do a little laundry, or I can do stuff with TASP or other things like that while Sarah's at school, and I don't have to be worried about Sarah not being at home. Be inclusive, respect non-professional supports. Yeah, you have to respect everybody. And even with that, and parent as a decision maker and team maker, and not even the parent, my older daughter, she has a relationship, and the boy at the beginning sounds like my daughter. My daughter didn't know anybody when she got into this relationship, and we're getting ready to have a team for her because I like this guy, but you never know. I'm worried about my daughter. My daughter's 20, almost 21 years old. She'll be 21 this summer, and I still worry about her. So so that it works around. It could be a wraparound with your community. It could be a wraparound with the schooling. It could be a wraparound with different things. Analytical nature of supports. I don't know what analytical is, so we'll have to make sure next time if we do something that we make sure it's the right language. So I don't know what that means.
Tom, do you want to jump in and explain that one?
Yeah, run it by me again.
The analytical nature of supports.
The something nature?
Analytical, the last one.
Cyclical? Oh,
nature.
yeah, sorry. Okay, I can jump in. What that is in plain language, sorry, Liz, in plain language, supports go through phases. Sometimes they start up with crisis. Sometimes they start up because the parent is looking for something, and it can be kind of needs-based. And then they kind of level off. So it's a cycle. They go through different stages, and it can, everyone's looking for stability. And as it becomes more stable, the formal supports start to back away because they're not.
So with mine, with that, is our wraparound people have told me that in October they're gonna step back some. So it's like, oh my goodness, I don't want you to step back, but they're gonna step back. I mean, they're still be around. Like Linda, I have her cell phone number. She said, call me. I'm not gonna be on your team, but if you have any questions, like for example, about camp next summer, we're not gonna do camp this summer because COVID is really, really high, I don't think, except for the school. So they can step back, but Linda is one of my personal supports now. So she's stepped off of that wraparound team, but I've gotten to know her really, really well. So she would be one of my personal support or my community team members. Yep. If we have wraparound for next year for Sarah. So I can call her up at any time and say, hey, that would be an awesome person for what we do.
Lindsay, I also like how you described that that's stepping back in October, which is months from now. So it's sounding like they're giving you a good amount of time to work together and plan, because I can hear that you're nervous about it, wondering what comes next. And it sounds like you have a good team who's thinking ahead and helping you plan for it.
I am, but we've already talked, and it might be later than that, because with Sarah, with being nonverbal, I don't know what she's going to need. I know what Julie is going to need, and my Julie is verbal. So it's a totally different concept when you have a verbal child and a nonverbal child. And if you want to switch to the next slide, Chelsea, this book, Forever, if we can see, I don't know if we can see it, The Forever Boy, Kate is a lady that is verbal, and her son is nonverbal. And it's just a really, really good book. And I've started to read it. And I'll put a link when we're done about her with her son. And it's just her story and how the community has gotten together. She was on PBS. We all know, I don't know if they have PBS in Canada, but it's this show, this is a channel that has all the cartoons and things like that. And Kate and her son is, I forget what his name is, but it's about her son and it's about her life. And it's right now it's the #1 seller on Amazon. And I went on a website and I got the book for free. And I'm going to share this book with my family members and with TASP and with other people. And the other one, The Celebration of Family, is just about my story and 17 other people, our stories about how our families have gotten together from the beginning when I had my kids and what supports I needed and what brought me into TASP and just a major circle around. So it helped me bring out, it helped me bring out everything that I needed to bring out.
Thanks, Lindsay. And we'll put those links in the chat and they'll also be in the follow-up email that everybody gets. So don't worry if you can't pull them out of the chat right now.
Oh, and I'll put Forever Boy. You don't have that one. I'll put that one in right now.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, I'm going to stop share and pass it back over to you, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay. Always good to hear your story. One of the other differences with informal supports is they can be there a lot longer, in that they're not goal-based, they don't have the same structure. They can come and go, but they can last longer. So sometimes when the planning is occurring, and as Lindsay was telling in her own story, is as a parent, you're looking at that scary transition. It is scary. I've had these supports, I trust these people, but they're not there forever. And okay, fine, the goals have been met. They need to move on. Caseloads are long. But on the other hand, for a parent, when you've had that support for a lengthy period of time, and now it's like time to look at that ending or transitioning. And I think transition might be a better word, because sometimes what can happen is the professional support can be replaced. And you want to do that.
Real quick,
yeah.
It's harder for people that have disabilities to get along with other people sometimes. So you just have to make sure that you gradually get in with that family. Just go there one time and say, hi, my name is whatever. Like if I was going to introduce myself to you, hi, my name is Lindsay. I'm a self-advocate. Something like that. You don't have to, and don't wear your badge. That's one thing that we've learned. Yeah. People wear badges and stuff like that. But a few of the people that we worked with, we told them not. We want them to be a part of our family, and we don't want to be looked at differently than them. So that's what I would tell people. And the other thing we're talking about is that plain language. We have to remember that people with disabilities don't understand some of the words that professionals use. So we use that plain language. Then it's easier for a person with a disability to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is for the parent to feel comfortable enough to say, I don't know what that means. I use something a little simpler. And I think that's really healthy, that when that happens, we just modeled it, when that happens, that the professional goes, oh yeah, you caught me, thank you. Now I'm going to use simpler language. The other thing that I want to touch on a little bit is the idea of consent. Is a number of adult parents who have IDD may not have functional literacy. So for them to, which means they may not have grade 6 comprehension, and for them to sign a contract or an agreement with dozens and dozens of words, many of which may not be in plain language, puts them at a real disadvantage, and they don't want to appear as not being cooperative. as being dumb. But on the other hand, if they don't know what they're signing or agreeing to, they're at a real disadvantage, not just from professionals, but others in their community to be exploited. So that becomes important for professionals to monitor that as well, and not to embarrass parents, but to say, you know, is there something here that doesn't make sense to you? Like, really take time to go over it, and whatever that agreement is. And we may think it's a simple agreement, but for some parents, it can really be intimidating. A number of families who work with the parents did not have the best experiences in schools. You put them in that situation where they're having to read something and understand it completely, can be intimidating. So,
And the one other thing that I would love to add, and I did a blog on it. We do a blog like two
yeah,
times a month for TASP. The one about acronyms, so many acronyms. We talk about things like that, and it's like, what is this? What is that? At the beginning of April, and it's on the Facebook page, and we can. It's on the TASP website. I talked about acronyms, like what things mean and things like that, and there are a few links in there to get the acronyms. Everybody doesn't know what DDS is and things like that. And yeah, Chelsea just put it in there. So that might be a good help for professionals that work with people with disabilities to make sure that you have that language as well.
I just had an experience where it kind of went the other way. Well, I was doing a training on Zoom with professionals, and I'd given out some written material for them to look at as to support the training. And one of the professionals says, I don't understand what this acronym is. What is IDD? And so I just assumed they knew, right? These are professionals. So we have to, even how we talk as professionals to other professionals, we have to kind of watch our plain language works for just about everybody. Let's keep it simple as best we can. I see we're getting questions, which is good. I don't want to delay that, but I am going to tell a story, trying to put together some of what Lindsay was saying in terms of how to make that blending of the formal and informal supports. So my story is about Jamie. Jamie was 16 years old when she discovered she was pregnant, and she was quite advanced in her pregnancy before she found out. Had a family, lived with her family, a very isolated community, and she wasn't getting great support from her family. There was a history of abuse from some family members, and she hadn't finished school yet, wanted to. And once her child was born, opportunity was given to her to parent her child, but the actual family home where she was staying was not the best environment. So Child Protection Services apprehended her daughter. And this led to Jamie had very blunt spoken young woman, very some issues with anger management, and could be pretty salty in her choice of words. And this did not go over well with the social workers who worked for Child Protection. So it became very adversarial. And she wanted one thing. She wanted to be a mother to her child. She wanted to live in the same home with her baby. And it became intense. Now, she was getting supports for herself as a young adult, youth services from service providers who worked with individuals with intellectual disabilities. And they became her advocates. They couldn't work with her on parenting because that wasn't their mandate, but they could work with her on life skills. They could work with her on anger management. They could work with trying to build a relationship that was less argumentative with the legal system, with child protection and the court. So they worked on that, and some progress was being made. The idea came out that she would move out of her family home with her mom, and they would live together. And by then, Jody was pregnant with her second child. And she wanted to be a mother to both her children. So they developed the idea of maybe some co-parenting. But what about the isolation? What about living in a community that already was remote? But what about connectors for Jamie? And she didn't trust the community gossip, didn't trust other individuals. It had had bad experiences since school, just didn't know what to do. But there were needs. She was very lonely. She had trouble accessing food, very little income. And so the service provider and the social worker working together with mom said, you know, let's see if we can connect her to, there's a parenting support group in the community, pregnancy outreach. And they meet every week and they talk about how to raise babies. They talk about their children and they talk about what works and what doesn't. And what do you do when your baby's really crying and you're getting really, really stressed? What are strategies? But it's parent to parent. What if we could get her there? And the mom said, well, she won't go there because so-and-so's terrible gossip, she doesn't want to go there. What if you went with her? By the way, family members can be part of the informal support group. So mom went with her. And one of the ways she got her daughter to go was she said, you know, there's this group and they make food every week and they're going to have Jamie's favorite food, bannock. And you'll be able to, you know, you go and there's a great recipe. I got my own recipe. Yeah, but this might be just as good. I do like that. And I can bring it home with me. Yes, you can bring it home with you. And she went. And she got support from the group. And they doted over her baby. And they made her feel really good. And they gave her tips. And she kept going back and coming back with food that supplemented their needs. So that made her feel much better about herself. And formal supports, working together. It's important that the formal supports, the professionals work together because sometimes they get adversarial too, and they need to develop that understanding. I know I mentioned that earlier, of each other and work together. So this is an example. Jamie and her mom are living together. They're co-parenting 2 babies, and for the most part, life is good. On that note, are we ready for questions?
I just put the survey link in the chat as well. I know sometimes we start losing people after an hour or so. That might be all the time they have. So if anybody needs to leave now or before the end, the link to the surveys in the chat, it just really helps us and our funders know what we're doing well, what we could improve, or what you'd like to see in the future. And it's completely anonymous. So if you have 2 seconds, we'd appreciate it. And if anybody has questions, feel free to either use the little raise your hand button if you'd like to ask it out loud, or just pop it in chat and one of us will make sure Tom and Lindsay sees it. I don't see any in there yet.
I did see a point from Karen, and she was right. Badges create a hierarchy that can be intimidating, and she's exactly right. So that's why we don't use badges.
Monica just asked for parenting support in Texas. Do we have any contacts? Tom and Lindsay, I can let you speak to that, but I know neither of you are in Texas. So Monica, I'll put my email in the chat box. You can also just always email the info email for TASP. We're always happy to have anybody email. We have a pretty broad network of supports across the country. If anybody on the webinar right now knows specifically the state of Texas, please put that in the chat. And otherwise, Monica, I'll put my email in right now. Feel free to email me and I can check in with our kind of network of support and our board of directors and see if anybody has direct contacts in Texas.
You're welcome, Monica.
And I just wanted to let people know that they haven't heard me before, that if you have questions or if you want to talk about things like this, I've talked to people in Washington State and other about parenting and things like that. So reach out to Chelsea and she can get a hold of me. So if you have any questions further, not on here, things like that, feel free.
So I'll just say, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, if there are any additional ones. I think most of you know about TASP at this point, but if you don't, we're really focused on training, education, advocacy, and support. And so we do have trainings that we offer periodically. And we also go into agencies, states, systems, and provide trainings for employees. We have two main trainings. One's called Working Successfully with Parents with IDD. And the other is called Trauma Parenting and Intellectual Developmental Disabilities, an intra and interagency puzzle. I also mentioned earlier, the next in this webinar series is in July, and it's around intersectional identities and parents with IDD. It's going to be presented by Dr. Julie Cloxton. I expect that registration to open up fairly soon. We usually try and open it up a month or two before the actual webinar date. So just keep your eye out on either our Facebook page or our email list. We'll let you guys know first on those two forums when that registration's open. We also have a mental health toolkit for providers who are working with parents with IDD, and a completely free organizational self-assessment to help agencies and states determine how they're doing in supporting parents with IDD. So I already put the survey link in the chat. Betsy, if you have a second, feel free to pop it in there again. You'll also get a follow-up email since you were on today that has that survey link. Again, it really helps us and our funders with the feedback. So if you have a chance to fill that out, it just takes a few minutes. It's pretty brief. You'll get another copy of the what we call the companion PDF. So kind of the highlights of the information that Tom and Lindsay shared today. And you also get a certificate of attendance for those who need it. You can just fill in your information there. And I see we do have a few questions. I can just read this one out loud and Tom and Lindsay can answer it. Tammy asked, what suggestions do you have for those that do not have family members to support them, especially when you are promoting those informal supports?
I go to my neighbor, or if you're part of a church family, people like that. That's the two people that I can think of at the top of my head. Maybe Tom can think of more.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think sometimes it's obvious that there's no substitute for families, but some families are not, have their own problems, their own difficulties, or there's distance. Geography could be an issue, and lack of interest over time. But I agree with Lindsay. I think looking for other, within other groups, I know some situations where we have parents who, I know in Indigenous communities, the auntie is a really important person. So sometimes they may not be blood relatives, but if someone takes on that role, which is like a parent or a big sister, and again, drawing from, I mentioned quilting earlier, the quilting group, it was like this lady went, she was a mom, single parent, she had 6 mothers. Like they all were doing motherly things with her. So you look for kinds of substitutions. What are the things that family would provide safely, and can you get it from other sources? And again, it can take time to develop that, but there are, looking for those opportunities in a community. They're there, but not always easy to find at first.
I just wanted to read these out loud too for people who aren't seeing the chat. Catherine also said, Montana based here, but we have a local Facebook group where families and providers are all in it. That has been really helpful for kids and parents. I know Lindsay also talked about using social media to connect with other people, obviously keeping safety in mind. And then Karen suggested, which is an option for anybody in the United States, to contact your local chapter of the ARC and see whether they can help at all with, it might be more formal supports, but they also might have some connections with depending where you are, with things that may be more informal as well.
And even if you don't have an ARC, there are, there might be a DD Council, Developmental Disabilities Council. I'll do that. It's okay, Dawn. We understand. But your Developmental Disabilities Council might have networks out there too. We have a Developmental Disability Council in Ohio. So I've gotten to contact them about things as well. So not just your ARC, there might be other sources in your communities. And if you need to reach out to Chelsea, we get an email for the whole group. And there might be people that we know that you don't know about. So yeah.
Yeah, most states or all states also have self-advocacy groups. So those are run by parents with disabilities. Those might be good connection points to see if they can connect you with other supports in the area. All states also have what's called a parenting center, which is mostly around kids and IEP services, school-based special education services, but parent centers are probably also worth a call just to see if they can make connections between families. So I don't see any other, if anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to pop them in there. Everybody has my email and just the TASP info email, which is also, I see up on the slide that's still up there. So if you have questions after this or just want to touch base with TASP about what we do or how we could help your organization or you individually or families or parents that you know, please feel free to reach out via email or connect with us on social media, however you're comfortable, and sign up for our next webinar in July. And otherwise, I think that's it. Thank you so much once again, as always, to Tom and Lindsay for sharing. Tom, I'm always, the way you share stories to tell and share information, I always find really helpful. And Lindsay, as always, for sharing, being willing and open to share your story and your family experiences, exceptionally helpful as well. So thank